All right, I've got to take a second and explain something to you here. How widths work in CSS. If I asked you how wide this object is, this blue div, what would you tell me if I flip back over to my code and if you look at my CSS? Would you tell me 300 pixels because that's the value that we have set here for the width? Well, as a matter of fact, the width on this object is 324 pixels. In other words, if I took a screenshot of this blue div and maybe opened it up inside Photoshop and actually measured out the width, it would actually be 324 pixels. How do I know that? Well, because I know that CSS is kind of bizarre when it comes to widths. How widths are calculated, widths on objects, of course, is what I'm referring to. How it's calculated is it takes the width property plus the padding property plus the border property. So the width or the thickness of the border. Now, how did I arrive at 324? Well, we have 300 for the width, right? There's 300. The padding, but the padding is on all four sides, right? The top and the bottom doesn't impact the width, but 10 pixels on the left and 10 pixels on the right most certainly does. So there's 20 pixels, so we're at 320 if you're keeping count. And the border appears on all four sides, and the width for that guy is, in my case anyway, 2 pixels. So that means 2 pixels on the top, 2 pixels on the bottom, 2 pixels on the left, and 2 pixels on the right, which brings us up to 324. Bizarre, but that's how it works. Now, the reason why I'm explaining all this to you is, once again, once we start getting into page layout, if you decide that you want to have an object that's exactly 500 pixels in width, for instance, but you know that you're going to have some padding in there or maybe a margin on it or what have you, well, then that's going to impact the actual width value that you wind up using inside your CSS rules. So you're going to have to factor in your border and your padding when you're trying to figure out exactly what width you should use. Now, you might want to spend some time experimenting around and seeing what happens. For instance, if I take my padding value and I crank it way up, maybe to 50, and then flip back over to the browser, I want to see an impact. I want to see a change on the width of my object. Refresh, whoa, there it is. Definitely this object is much wider than it was before, right? So you have to be careful with this stuff. Same with the border as well. If I crank this way up, say 10 pixels, and then refresh, again, the overall width of my object increases. Notice the border is actually on the inside of the object, right? Increasing that object's overall width. So just watch out for this stuff. It took me forever to figure this out, figure out exactly what's going on, but that's how widths are being measured in CSS.